Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. In a world where peace and balance often feel out of reach, is there a place where we may find hidden sanctuary? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Andy Becker, says he found this in his own garden. Blending expert gardening tips with timeless spiritual wisdom, Andy reveals how tending to the earth can inspire a more vibrant, fulfilling life. Andy Becker is a writer, gardener, and lifetime learner who lives in Western Washington with his wife Donna and their two dogs, Nova and Splash. A successful small-town lawyer, Andy found respite from the vicissitudes of fighting for the little guy against insurance companies by gardening, hiking, and camping with his family, and by expanding his spirituality through Judaism. His writing has been directly fueled by his lifetime experiences and influenced by Chassidic philosophy. His website is andybecker.life, and he joins me this week to share his path and award-winning book, The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help Your Garden Grow. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Andy Becker. Welcome, Andy.
Welcome. How are you? Good to be here.
Wonderful, sir. Yourself, I hope the same, and it's wonderful to have you come with us today and share your wisdom. Andy, please share with us your early path and how it laid the foundation for both your professional and your spiritual calling.
Thank you. Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I wrote my first novel, which I need to locate. I was 19 years old when I wrote it. It's in a basement chest, and it's in a box. So I need to find it so I can shred it because I'm sure it's absolutely terrible. Over a course of years, I raised a family. I have a beautiful wife. We've got two dogs. We live in Gig Harbor, Washington. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to San Mateo High School. I went to UC Berkeley. Then I went to law school up here in Washington State. The legal profession is a great it's a great occupation. It was fun. I was a lawyer in a small town called Port Orchard, Washington. It's the county seat for a county called Kitsap County, which is across some water from Seattle, about an hour away. And I was, a hard worker, kind of what I call a grinder. I answered phone calls every day. I worked hard. My kids, even though I didn't spend as much time with them as I would have liked in retrospect, have turned out great. I'm now a grandparent of two little kids, and one of our kids is a doctor, and the other one is a lawyer. I tell people it's a Jewish mother's dream. We have a doctor and a lawyer in the family. Anyway, I was always a gardener. My wife can attest to that. And I was always trying to grow stuff. And we finally moved to the yard and house that we're at now. We've been here about 25 years. And every spring and summer, I'm out there trying to grow a vegetable or two. Some years I'm very successful. Some years are dismal failures with one plant or another. Every year is a surprise. And I suppose the gardening really helped me when it came to the vitriol that we so often see in our current legal system. I mean, it's a system of adversarial disputes and conflict. Everybody wants to win. I mean, the way I grew up, I don't know about you, Victor, But the way I grew up, I was taught not to relate to other people, not to be kind to other people, but to compete to try and outdo the other guy. And I certainly brought that background to my work on behalf of many, many clients over, close to 4 decades. I do think the gardening was an escape to come home after working hard all day and to go play in the dirt, to make friends with an earthworm, to hear the birds twittering. Interestingly, there are all sorts of studies, psychological and medical, about the health benefits of gardening, but I never knew about any of them until after I wrote The Spiritual Gardener. Contemporaneous with my gardening, finding a respite from the legal work I did, I had 2 kids. My spiritual tradition is Judaism, and both kids had bar mitzvahs. So I was kind of reawakened my formal spiritual education with those events, started going to synagogue a lot. You know, my best friend at synagogue, Dan, when the rabbi would give a sermon, I'd perk up on a Friday evening, but he would, quote, rest his eyes, have a little sleep, have a refreshing nap while I would start paying attention. After a time, we started having, in addition to all the services and sermons and whatnot and all the holidays, we started also studying once a week, kind of a lunch and learn in the conference room of my law office. So after many, many years, when it was time to back off from my legal work, I started writing, which is what I always wanted to do in the first place, but never had done. The first book I wrote was kind of a love letter to Mom. Their childhood stories about growing up in the Bay Area in the 1950s and 60s, called Cracking an Egg. And then after that, I wrote The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help Your Garden Grow. And what I did in that book, which is my most popular book, is I took 2 ancient traditions, gardening, which has been around as long as human civilization, and Judaism, which has also been around for a few thousand years, and combined them with my own scratching in the dirt here in Gig Harbor, Washington State, to come up with this book. And then I really lucked out. We got an illustrator from the University of Washington who was studying for her master's in fine arts. And she did just the most amazing watercolors to pair with the 18 chapters in the book. Each chapter has a different theme. For example, TikTok Early Spring Gardener is about time management from a spiritual perspective, getting out there. I mean, in gardening, timing is everything. You gotta, where I live, and also, where you're located in the New York area, you've got to get out there in spring, get the weeding done, get down your hands and knees, even though it might be cold and damp, and get everything set up. And right now, actually, Victor, is a good time to put in the radish, the peas, the beets, and the spinach seeds. You could start them right now where I live and where you live. But I would say every chapter has a theme. So that's about time management. I have a chapter on bitterness called horseradish,
yes,
which I can tell you about.
We're gonna be looking at all of those chapters,
okay.
Not all of them, several of those chapters, and talking about the themes. But I had one question before we start talking about the book.
Sure.
How would you define Hasidic wisdom, and how does it approach traditional Jewish teachings?
Well, the Hasidic tradition started with a tzaddik, a holy person named the Baal Shem Tov. And he believed in a couple of things, one of which was to bring all the mystical and stories of the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, the written Bible, and the Talmud. We can explain what the Talmud is too, if you want, to the masses, to the people, that we wouldn't just have the highest level of Jewish thought in the yeshivas and where the disciples were studying all day long with their masters. But we would go from village to village and really connect with the people. And we wouldn't have these, secrets about Judaism. So the Kabbalah, the mystical kind of Judaism, started being proliferated and available to people. Of course, today we have Judaism as much as you could ever want. I mean, we have enough to fill all the oceans. I mean, there's so much available and for free. But starting with the Baal Shem Tov, we had also a philosophy of this positivity of the joy, kind of like the Fiddler on the Roof, the idea that we don't just want to do good deeds, we don't just want to do blessings and important things like we're commanded to do, but we want to do it with joyfulness. And that's really an integral part. Even doing mundane activities, you want to do with joyfulness. But gardening really fits in. I mean, anything relating to nature, because, it's all being part of creation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about some of your earlier books. You had mentioned 2019's Cracking an Egg. What inspired this book, and what do you share with readers?
Well, I just wanted to try and remember my earliest memories and funny family stories. So there's a variety of what I would call rites of passage. The first time I was at a preschool and a girl who I had a crush on, I was probably staring at her too much, and she looked at me in passing one day and called me peanut butter face. So there's a story about how traumatic that event was for me at age whatever it was, 5 or 6, and how my mother dealt with it. Or there's a story about my mom taking action when my 10-speed bike in 5th grade, the first day I was able to ride it to school, it got stolen by a fellow student, and I knew who it was. It was a guy in a grade older than me who was a bit of a bully, and Mom got me in the car and we drove straight to the guy's house, and she said, "Stay here," and went up to the door and rang the bell and had a talking to the kid's mom, and that got my bike readily produced back to me, and I rode it home. My brother, sister, and dad also have what I'd call supporting roles in this book, but Mom's really the star. There's stories about a camping and a fishing trip where my dad mixed up his gout pills with some temporary pills my mom had to take for an illness she had that turned out to be tranquilizers. And he kept pulling the car over to sleep on a picnic table in the middle of nowhere. My mom couldn't figure out what the problem was. There's a wonderful story about my dad taking me to the local school for a bus ride to try skiing, which I never was able to learn how to do. But we were all Cub Scouts, and they had an excursion for this ski trip. And on the way, very, very early in the morning, like 7 o'clock in the morning, there was a kid with a little tiny dog on a leash, and that dog was in a dog fight with a German Shepherd dog. And my dad, still wearing his crushed down slippers and bathrobe, because he was just going to get me, the 10-minute drive to the school, drop me off at the bus with the other Cub Scouts, and then go back home and go to bed, suddenly slammed on the brakes, leaped out of the vehicle, I was in shock watching my dad be such a hero, but he went and scared the German Shepherd dog away. So those are just kind of a little smattering of some of the stories in there. I was a big Giants fan, so there were some occasions that had a big impact. The Dodgers always won. The Giants never won. There was the World Series where the Yankees beat the Giants in '62. I just loved Willie Mays and Juan Marichal. You know, Willie died last year, and even though he was very elderly and I knew he was sick, as soon as I heard the news, I think we were watching the PBS news on television, the announcement came, I just burst into tears because he had meant so much to me as a little kid. Yeah. And I grew up with him. You know, I'm still mad at the Giants for trading him to the Mets, by the way. I'll never forgive. But anyway, so those stories in Cracking an Egg, I think they're somewhat universal. They're rites of passage. They're a love letter to my mom, really. And I think people who've read this book, I mean, it can appeal to people of all ages, but I think people who've read the book, who grew up particularly in the 60s, can really identify with some of these stories.
2021 brought The Kissing Rabbi, Lust, Betrayal, and a Community Turned Inside Out. It's written as a novel, but was based upon actual events and the Me Too movement, which was going on at the time. Please share a little about that.
Well, sure, I will. I had a first row seat to an actual event in Tacoma, Washington. It was a year or two before the pandemic, where we had this big scandal. And after a year or so of a lot of drama, the rabbi left the area. He was eventually replaced by another rabbi. I would say that what really got me going to write this novel wasn't the event that I witnessed, but it was Bill Cosby. And I grew up with Bill Cosby from his comedy records to the TV show I Spy, to Dr. Huxtable, to Fat Albert, comedy specials, you name it. He was just such a brilliant star, had a worldwide acclaim. And yet here we are learning that he basically used drugs and was prosecuted for date raping woman after woman after woman. And you're like, well, how could that be? You're a multimillionaire, maybe he was even a billionaire. You have all the wealth, acclaim. I'm sure he had no difficulty with ladies and groupies and whatnot, having that level of fame. And yet here he is behaving in that manner. And I started thinking about other narcissistic personalities, politicians who were accused of misbehavior with women, like Clinton and Trump. Cuomo is another one. And I just wanted to try and understand, well, what are the elements of narcissism? Yeah. How is this Me Too thing being exposed so much? And look at the people who are accused. What can we figure out? So I started writing The Kissing Rabbi, really, one, to write a cautionary tale, because what happened in actuality was a community it was a little tiny community built around this rabbi in Tacoma that became very, very quickly polarized. The allegations were hard to understand. There was a lot of confusion. Half the congregation wanted to give the rabbi a chance to do some counseling and reform. The other half, the ultra-Orthodox people, were like, no, He's not qualified. He should never be a rabbi again. So it was this giant drama. So what I tried to do, and this, I call it my pandemic book because that's when I wrote it. What I tried to do is really dissect narcissism, Me Too, polarization, these very kind of heavy themes surrounding orthodoxy. And I feel pretty proud of the book. It won a Mark Twain Award for humor and satire. So I channeled my inner Mark Twain and my inner Shalom Aleichem, the Jewish Mark Twain,
Yes.
to write this book. And in fact, before writing it, I went and found on my bookshelf in one of my son's bookshelves, we had pretty much purchased every Shalom Aleichem novel and collection of short stories that were ever published and translated into English. And I reread all of those. Of course, we had all this time on our hands during the pandemic. And I commenced writing The Kissing Rabbi. And, to try and get the points across about narcissism and Me Too and polarization and people's behavior, I thought it best to write with humor, to write satirically. And, frankly, if you're ultra-Orthodox, you're not going to want to read this book. It's a little unique. Usually in Jewish American literature, Jewish literature generally, the protagonist is I would say, either a hero or a victim. In my book, the protagonist is really an antagonist. And you don't see an antagonist being the central character in the book, but you can tell it's satire immediately because on even the first page where you're introduced to the rabbi, his name is Mishigas Dreidel. So Mishigas, for New Yorkers like you,
craziness.
Yeah, it's nonsense. Dreidel is the spinning top. So no Jewish mother in her right mind is ever going to name her son Mishigas Dreidel. So it's a satire. It just jumps off the page on the very first page of the novel. Interestingly, on another podcast out of England, the woman whose podcast it was going to interview me about my gardening book. And she had done some research on me and she'd found The Kissing Rabbi. And is like she had to tell me her story. Well, 25 years ago, her husband was a rabbi, and she went through the same thing as the Rebbitzin, as the rabbi's wife. And her husband got kicked out of their community. The community was polarized. She ended up suffering a divorce. He ended up moving from England to Florida, where he started a new synagogue. Very, very interesting how her personal story connected with there were so many parallels between her personal story and this novel I wrote, knowing nothing about her circumstances. And really, I didn't know accurately what really happened in Tacoma, Washington, because there were so many versions and nobody really talked about it. It was more talking about what to do next and a lot of platitudes. But I recommend the book if you like humor and satire and you want to read a book. I mean, for some people, it is triggering for victims of sexual harassment. It can be a triggering book, I'm told. And for ultra-Orthodox people, they are not going to probably like it at all.
And the lesson that's learned in your story, in that story, And in many of these stories, and it doesn't matter whether the person, whatever faith the person might be, is if you have a spiritual leader, take the teachings, embrace the teachings, but you don't have to embrace the person. And that's something that a lot of people learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Well, you've said that really, really well. Sometimes we put so much faith into a spiritual leader and we forget that they're human and subject to all the mistakes and frailties, same as everyone else. And we're shocked when something happens because we put them on a pedestal, we put them on another level. And the bottom line is priests, rabbis, ministers, reverends, we're all on the same level as everybody else.
Absolutely. My guest, Andy Becker. We're going to be talking about his book, The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help Your Garden Grow. Andy, please share with our listeners where they can find out more about you and get all of your wonderful books.
Thank you so much. So I'm available on any of your internet favorite bookstores. Independent bookstores can also clearly order any of my books. You know, there's that behemoth Amazon can get you my book within like a day or two. So I'm certainly there. And they have the nice feature where you can look inside the book and read a chapter or two or read about the book and read reviews. And then I also have an author website, andybecker.life. So that's Andy, A-N-D-Y, Becker, B-E-C-K-E-R, period, L-I-F-E, andybecker.life. And I'm happy to send you a book or many copies of the books. 3 of my books, the Spiritual Garden series, which are about growing vegetables, growing and planting trees and caring for our forests, and then aging, getting older and growing grandchildren. The Spiritual Garden series on my website, you can get all 3 for 50 smackers. So that's a bit of a discount, and I throw in free shipping on that. I also pay the tax.
Wonderful.
So it's a real, if you buy all 3, it's a real special deal. But there's other good things on my website. I have a Spiritual Sparks newsletter. It comes out very sporadically, but you can sign up for that. That's free. I've got some vlogs. I didn't know what a vlog was. I kind of knew what a blog was, but I didn't know what a vlog was until I started writing books. Well, a vlog is a video blog. And if you click around on my website, you'll see that there are some video blogs that are short but entertaining about spiritual ideas in relation to gardening.
Absolutely. And we'll be back with more of Andy after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Andy Becker. We're talking about his book, The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help Your Garden Grow. Andy, what inspired this book?
What inspired this book is just wanting to share how much fun I've had gardening and all of the different aspects of it. Sometimes you're a genius in the garden and sometimes you're an absolute fool. But the bottom line is you can plant the seeds, but it's really nature or God or whoever, whatever you want to call it, that is the creator. And you're getting to participate in creation when you take a little piece of land and you're just trying to turn it into something beautiful. As a gardener, I can guarantee you that if you grow strawberries, if you're in a region where strawberries grow, that first perfectly ripe strawberry that you pick in spring is going to be so delicious and so wonderful. It's going to beat to the nines anything you could buy in a store, even though the stores are getting better at selling fruit. Fruit represents luxury on a spiritual basis. I mean, if God wanted us just to toil, we could just eat our bowl of mush in the morning, work all day, come home and eat another bowl of mush. But, that Hasidic philosophy is God also wants us to enjoy life. And that's what fruit is all about. If you have your own garden, you're growing a cucumber, a tomato, whatever it may be. I mean, right now is a good time to plant the peas, the radish, the beets, the spinach. It's going to taste so good when you get to harvest it, assuming you get to harvest and you're successful in the gardening, because nothing's guaranteed when you're planting the seeds. You get better at it as time goes on, but every year has its successes and failures guaranteed. So I just wanted to share the gardening experiences that I've enjoyed over the years. I think it's a great way to lessen your environmental footprint. I think it's a great way to really enjoy your family and friends. You're always going to grow something where it's way more than you can eat that summer. And it's such a fun thing to bring some vegetables to the office, to your family, to your grandchildren. Just growing a garden. I mean, it's just the best. So that's really the motivation for writing The Spiritual Gardener.
You begin every chapter with quotes and sayings of wisdom. Is there one that particularly stands out for you?
I like them all. There is one from a rabbi whose name is Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was a spiritual leader at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. He was such an important rabbi that during the siege of the city, he was actually smuggled out by his disciples in a coffin. That's how they got him out of the city, and so he could survive. He was very instrumental later in Talmudic thought, but he had a saying. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, for listeners, Yochanan would be like Jonathan, Ben would be son of, Zakkai would be like Zachary. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used to say, if you have a sapling in your hand and someone says, come quick, Moshiach, the Messiah has come, first plant the sapling and then go and meet the Messiah. In other words, there are two really important thoughts here. First is planting a sapling, caring about the future. That's a blessing. That's a mitzvah. That's a good deed. Planting is a good deed. Caring for the earth is a blessing. But more than that, even if someone says, hey, come and meet the Messiah, first stay on task. Don't get distracted from the trumpet's blare of the latest headline. Don't get distracted by politics. Pay attention to what's going on in the world by all means. I'm not saying to bury your head in the sand. Pay attention. But if you're in the midst of doing a blessing, of doing a good deed, maybe you're caring for little grandchildren, maybe you're doing your job, which is helping other people, whatever your mitzvah is, whatever your blessing is, whatever your good deed is, don't get distracted. Complete the task at hand. And I love that particular quote. But all of these epigraphs, I have quotes from the Baal Shem Tov to Groucho Marx in that book, and they're all really good meditative ideas. I do the same thing in the two other books in the Spiritual Garden series, The Spiritual Forest, and then the aging book, Grandy Let's Play. I think of the three, the most meditative of the three is probably my book about trees, The Spiritual Forest. But I love all of the epigraphs. Epigraphs, for people who don't know, are just quotes from famous holy people or from the Bible or the Talmud, all sorts of people. And each chapter has a snappy little quote from somebody that's juicy and worth thinking about.
We can also call those aphorisms.
Yes.
So in essence, what you're doing is you're turning the act of gardening truly into a deeply spiritual experience.
Well, it is a deeply spiritual experience. I mean, every piece of ground is holy ground. If you think about it, you're taking an unused piece of the area of dirt and you're breathing life into it, not because you have the power of creation, but you have the power of participating in creation. You have the power of making something that is mundane into something beautiful.
This is actually co-creation.
Correct. 100%.
Co-creation, and as my spiritual teacher used to say, when Adam and Eve lost their garden, they went out into the world, had to garden again, but the God said to them, from this point forward, I do nothing without you, meaning we co-create together.
I love how you've said that. Well stated. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there specific prayers for the planting of a garden?
Well, there are specific prayers, but you don't need a specific prayer. I mean, there are prayers in Judaism for first fruits. We have different holidays where, based on our tradition, our agrarian society, we did have prayers, and in fact, in the Spiritual Forest, I do have a prayer for when the time of Tu B'Shvat, which is the holiday when the trees go from being at rest to they're sat moving again. But there are blessings of a fruit tree for sure. And that's in the tree book. You will find a specific blessing. There's also a prayer before you eat vegetables and fruits. We also have a big holiday coming up for those of us who are Jewish called Pesach, Passover, which is the Seder table where we are commanded to tell the story of Passover, tell the story of our enslavement and our liberation, tell the story of our receipt of the Ten Commandments and the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. And certainly we have prayers every step of the way, blessings for the 4 cups of wine, blessings for the vegetables for sure, and the bitter herbs. I would like to share with Passover in mind my chapter in the gardening book about horseradish.
Please.
Is that okay with? Thank you, Victor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I wrote a chapter on horseradish. I had the experience of being presented a little horseradish plant in a plastic baggie from my wife, whose friend at book club said, give this to Andy, have him plant it. It's horseradish. So I planted it, Victor, and it grew and grew like you can't believe. It has kind of like tropical looking giant leaves. And then it started popping up in different places in the garden. And it actually was a big lesson for me because horseradish doesn't just grow a taproot, it grows horizontal roots. So if you don't confine the horseradish, your beautiful garden is going to turn into a horseradish farm. It took me literally several years to dig up the horseradish and get it out of there because it just kept popping up new places and I didn't want it to take over. If I'd left it alone, I'd have a horseradish farm to this day. When I did dig up the horseradish, I found that just with a potato peeler, a carrot peeler, you could clean your horseradish, peel off all the dirt, put it in a blender or a Cuisinart or a Ninja of some sort, grind it up. I like to throw in a purple beet. Maybe you put in a little water, a little vinegar, that's to taste. And ta-da, you have the most beautiful horseradish condiment. Now, if you're going to make horseradish like I do, this is what I would say. Number one, where you grow your horseradish, you have to grow it somewhere where you can confine it. Maybe you have an area between the house and a walkway with sandy soil and a lot of sun. That would be perfect. But when you make your horseradish, I recommend you wear some gloves, you don't touch your eyes, you don't touch your nose, and you open all the windows. It's easy to make, and then you just put it in a jar, you can freeze it. I'll tell you, it's the most unusual gift to give to a neighbor, a friend, a relative. One little jar of that stuff is powerful, and it can last a whole year as a present. Now, what does horseradish represent on a spiritual level? Well, if you've been to a Seder and you're of my generation, you might remember the grandparents would eat white raw horseradish at the Passover Seder. Raw horseradish. And I remember the tears coming down the cheeks of my grandparents. And then I remember the great aunts and uncles. The kids didn't have to do it. And my parents, they would eat the horseradish that was diluted, with the beets and stuff. But that first generation of immigrant grandparents and uncles and great uncles and aunts, they would eat the raw horseradish. The tears would come down, and then there would be a tremendous amount of nose blowing that would last for a while. But this was a tradition in the Becker Goldberg household where I grew up for our Passover Seders at my grandparents' house, which is where it happened every year in, year out. So horseradish represents bitterness. This is what I would say about bitterness on a spiritual level. We're all, as part of the human condition, going to have bitter times. It could be with a boss, with an employee, with a coworker that you don't get along with and things escalate and become bitter. Maybe, God forbid, there's a family member with whom you're just banging heads against the wall, and relations deteriorate. It's part of the human condition to have bitter things in our human relationships. They're going to happen from time to time. Well, what's the lesson? What's the lesson from horseradish? When we have bitterness in our lives, we have to confine it. We can't let it leach from one relationship to another. If we have a bitter something with somebody, that doesn't mean it has to grow to that whole person's acquaintances, family, friends, and so forth. We have to confine the bitterness. And Judaism does that. When we deal with the bitterness and the tears of slavery, which we experienced for 400 years in Egypt, we do it 2 nights out of the year. We don't perseverate on it every day of every month. we confine it to the Passover time. In Judaism, we certainly have, Yom Kippur, where we go through a full day of confessional prayers, where we can, rebirth our spiritual level, raise our spiritual level, refine ourselves, and let go of the bitterness of the past year. The Sabbath, the Shabbos, is a wonderful time for contemplation, to confine the bitterness that we suffer from time to time in our daily lives. So I wrote a chapter in the Spiritual Gardener. It was kind of a surprise for me to actually grow horseradish and make horseradish. But the thing about bitterness in our lives, it also enhances what is sweet, what is beautiful in our lives.
Absolutely. My guest is Andy Becker. His book, The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help Your Garden Grow. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Andy Becker. His book, The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help Your Garden Grow. Andy, you share a wonderful story about rabbits invading your garden and your thoughtful approach to this. Please give us a little taste of that.
Well, thank you so much. Where I'm living, for some reason, it was like an epidemic, a population explosion like you can't believe, of bunnies one year. And you'd go out and look at your string bead seedlings, and they'd all be in a row, but they'd be missing all their leaves. They'd be chopped down like clear cutting a forest. So rather than being like Mr. McGregor and wanting to shoot all the bunnies, I came up with some self-help of making frames with the cheapest wood I could find, basically making squares that I could lift off and lift onto my raised garden beds using bird netting just around stapling the bird netting to the frames. But until I came up with that solution, I was so angry at the bunnies because they were, eating every, I'd done the weeding, I'd done the seeding, I'd done the watering and more weeding and more growing. And then here comes this army of cute little rabbits, typically when I'm, in the house or it's dark or snoozing on my pillow for the night and coming out and seeing all your labors for naught. Well, on a spiritual level, it's important whether it's bunnies or deer or things that creep and crawl in the night, all those bugs and insects. I mean, they're all doing their job. There's a quote in the book by the Baal Shem Tov about how man shouldn't be so arrogant and how we were, last in creation, how the little worm or the little gnat or insect is perfectly doing its job to 100% of its capacity, while we human beings are, far less in our ability to fulfill our capacity. So that's an insight about the damn wabbits. Let me talk a little bit about seeds. Some seeds are of no interest to the insects and pests and birds and bunnies where you live. So why not grow those plants and grow them successfully? There's a kind of green lettuce that I've given up trying to grow, but I can grow red lettuce and nothing bothers it. It's rather amazing. Seeds represent, I like to talk about seeds too, if I may, because seeds on a spiritual level represent potential. And it's amazing how seeds have this hard shell, and under the right conditions, that shell disintegrates. It's like every single seed you plant is its own little miracle. It's a concept in spirituality called nullification, that the human being is very egocentric and always thinking of him or herself. So we have to nullify ourselves to some degree to think of others. Well, that's what a seed does. A seed nullifies itself to grow a root, to grow a stem, to grow leaves, and then to pop up out of the ground and reach for the light. And that's the concept of nullification. It leaves that shell behind to fulfill its potential. And as human beings, we want to ask ourselves, how do we fulfill our potential? And it's even a bigger question than that, Victor. If we were born into a perfect world, if we were born in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, how is it that humanity finds itself in its current predicament? We have miles of islands of garbage floating in our oceans. Is that what God intended? We have deforestation, pestilence. We have starvation. We have war. We have cruelty. How do we reverse this trend? If we find ourselves in our current situation after being born into a perfect world, how do we change the trajectory to head back in that direction? Because the direction we're going in now is not very sustainable. I think we can all agree we're not happy about that as a human race. So let's reverse the trend. So I'm suggesting in my writings, for example, The Spiritual Gardener, maybe just growing some basic food is a step in the right direction. Maybe planting trees. Of course, we always want to plant the right tree at the right time in the right place. Maybe planting trees, and maybe really giving love and attention to the next generation, to our grandchildren, is the way to do that. There's that wonderful story in the Talmud about the carob tree, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, Victor, but it always bears repeating. There's the oldster, there's a senior citizen planting a carob tree, and the young man comes by, and he says, "Is that a carob tree?" And the old man says, "Yes." And the young man says, "Well, doesn't it take 70 years? Doesn't it take 70 years for a carob tree to bear fruit?" And the old man says, "That's true." And the young man says, "Well, sir, is your health so good that you expect to live another 70 years? And the man says, "Just as my ancestors planted for me, I'm planting for my children and their children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren." Mm-hmm. And I love that story about the carob tree. Comes straight from me. It's not my story. Comes from the Talmud. Caring for our grandchildren, caring for our children is about caring for the future. Planting trees is about caring for the future. Lessening our environmental footprint is about caring for the future. And these are all things that we can do on a daily basis. There are blessings and mitzvahs just right there for us to enjoy. And when you plant a garden, you plant a tree, you spend time with your family, it is all about caring, and love. And at the end of the day, Victor, isn't that what it's all about?
May all the seeds we plant be seeds of love. My guest, Andy Becker, his book, The Spiritual Gardener, Insights from the Jewish Tradition to Help your garden grow. Andy, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get all of your books and your amazing wisdom.
Thank you so much. I don't know how amazing it is. It's all been there for thousands of years within our reach. But feel free to check out my author website, andybecker.life, AndyBecker.life, or Amazon or any other internet bookstore that you may enjoy. Thank you so much, Victor.
And when you go to Andy's website, you can get the collection of his books plus some extras for a very special price. Is that correct?
If you want to buy 3 books which comprise the Spiritual Garden series, you can get all 3 for 50 smackers, plus I'll pay the tax, plus I will provide free shipping. What a deal.
What a deal. That's wonderful. Andy, to you and your family and to everyone out there, as my Yiddish abubi, my Yiddish grandmother used to say, Asitzen Pesach, may you have a sweet Passover.
Aksameach, good Yontif. Have a good Yontif, a pleasant Yontif, a fun Yontif. And don't forget, 4 cups of wine, not those little tiny glasses. Come on, 4 for real glasses of wine.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.